Hey everyone, in this video I'll show you how to adjust the headset on any bike equipped with a specialized FutureShock system. Now this includes the Diverge like I have here, but also the Roubaix, the Roubaix, and some Sirrus models as well. Now the FutureShock headset is conceptually similar to a traditional threadless headset, but the implementation is quite different, and so I'll show you how to make the adjustment on your FutureShock equipped bike. Now for reference, on a traditional threadless headset, the fork slides up through the bottom of the frame head tube, and a contact point is made between the lower race on the fork and the cartridge bearing, which seats into the frame. Now at the top of the head tube there's the upper headset bearing, and the fork steer tube is centered within the head tube, usually by way of a conical compression sleeve. Now above that are a combination of headset spacers and stem, and on the very top is a headset top cap and the preload bolt that threads into the top of the fork steer. Now the purpose of the preload is to compress everything and eliminate any play in the bearings. Now for this reason, the stem or the headset spacers must extend past the top of the fork steerer in order for the preload bolt to provide any compression. The preload screws should be tightened just enough to remove any play in the headset, but not so tight as to hinder the smooth rotation of the bearings. Now once the preload is set, straighten the handlebars and tighten the stem pinch bolts to the proper torque. Now the FutureShock system, while pretty radically different in design, actually operates on the same principle of preload compression and pinch bolts. The main difference is that to accommodate the FutureShock cartridge, the preload and the pinch bolts have to be moved lower into the system. In the case of the FutureShock, the fork steer still slides up through the bottom of the frame head tube, and there's still a conical compression sleeve on the top side. However, from here, you'll notice that the fork steer is actually cut off pretty short. Now this allows the FutureShock to slide into the fork steer tube and act as an extension of the fork steer. Now holding them together is the critical clamping collar, which is positioned in place by a 2.5mm hex screw. Now at this point the adjustment process is a little bit backwards from a traditional headset. You actually want to put the bike on the ground and compress the system as best you can by hand while tightening the pinch bolt on the collar to a torque of 4 Nm. Now this actually serves the same purpose as tightening the stem pinch bolts on a traditional stem. Now once you do this, the fork steer and the FutureShock cartridge act as one solid unit. Now to eliminate any residual play in the headset, you then use these 2mm hex screws on either side of the collar to create that compression in the system in the same way the top cap provides compression on a traditional system. Now for this reason, it doesn't really make sense to call them preload screws anymore, since they're actually adjusted after the pinch bolt is tightened. Now I think technically it makes more sense to call them post-load screws, but that might just add to the confusion. In any case, you need to tighten these screws down incrementally, switching back and forth to provide even distribution of force. Now thankfully, the metric for proper bearing load is the same as on a traditional system, in that you want it tight enough to eliminate any play in the system, but not so tight as to hinder rotational motion. Now once the compression is set by these post-load screws, you want to make certain that they don't back themselves out while riding by tightening the locking screws down on top of them. Now in order to do this, you're supposed to use a tiny 3mm spanner wrench to hold the post-load screw in place from underneath the collar, and then tighten down the locking screw from above with a 2.5mm hex wrench to a torque of 1 Nm. Now my owner's manual didn't come with one of these ridiculously tiny spanners, so I've made do without one, and I've had okay luck just tightening down the lock screw as best I can. Now the headset has come loose on occasion, and I'm certain it's because these tiny but critical screws aren't properly locked into place. So eventually I will need to source a super thin 3mm spanner from somewhere. Now perhaps the one upside to the complexity of the FutureShock system is that you can actually adjust the headset compression without having to loosen the pinch bolt. In other words, if you find that your FutureShock headset does come loose over time, you can tighten it without loosening the pinch bolt on the collar, which isn't possible on a traditional system. Now this could potentially save you some time, as you wouldn't then need to realign your handlebars and torque your stem pinch bolts down after you've set the preload. But hey, we're just trying to look on the bright side here. Now at this point you can go ahead and clamp the stem onto the top of the FutureShock cartridge. Now remember, there's no need for a preload screw up here, since that was all taken care of lower in the system, which is why the top cap on the FutureShock system has no hole. It's just an aesthetic cap for a clean look. Now at this point, if you want to ensure that you get your handlebars perfectly straight, make sure to check out this video up here when you get a minute. But this also brings up the issue of adjusting the stem height. Since you can't adjust the location of the stem on the FutureShock cartridge itself, the only way to adjust the stem height is to raise or lower the entire FutureShock cartridge within the fork steer tube. Now you can do this by adding or removing spacers between the FutureShock rubber boot and the dust cover. The only thing is that these are not the same size as your standard headset spacer. So if you do try to use a standard headset spacer, you're just going to find that they're too small and they won't fit. Now this video up here and down in the description explains the whole thing in greater detail if you're interested. But to quickly summarize, if you were lucky enough, then your owner's manual would have come with a few plastic FutureShock specific spacers that you can use to adjust your stem height. If not, then you can try to have a specialized dealer order some for you, but I've heard from multiple people already that when they tried, the shop that they went to wasn't willing or able to place a special order for such a tiny part. Now either way, if you want, you can get some nice 6061 alloy spacers that are identical to the proprietary specialized ones in my online shop, linked down in the description below. Now I've sold out of the initial run of these spacers, but I just got more in stock, so if you need some, they should be available. These work on both the FutureShock 1.5 as well as on the 2.0, and if it helps to ease your mind, I am a licensed professional engineer in the state of California, and these parts were designed in CAD and manufactured through a third-party manufacturing company who performed the product inspection and also applied the nice anodized finish. I've been using 2 of these 5mm spacers on my Diverge, and the stem height is just perfect for my style. Now, whether you use the proprietary specialized spacers or you purchase some from my online shop, be certain not to use more than a total of 15mm worth of spacers according to Specialized. Okay, so that's it for this quick how-to. You now know how to adjust the headset on your FutureShock equipped bike. Now hopefully, like me, you'll slowly learn the ins and outs of the FutureShock system as well and get more comfortable working on it yourself in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to ask down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching and subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.